bees are in trouble. This is nothing new. We're all aware of that. And we're all aware that more and more we live in cities, and we want to make those cities more ecologically friendly. So, combining all of that, let's just all go out and keep bees. It's not necessarily that easy, though. And I want to talk about some of the things that we need to think about in terms of doing that, of keeping those urban bees. As I say here, it's a surprise to me, but it turns out not everybody in the city likes bees. Go figure. Who knew? Sometimes they just don't know. Sometimes the bees are a menace. And the beekeeper sometimes is a menace. I ran into a few of those. So this is a little swarm that I caught, and just as a point of show and tell, I brought my swarm catching box. It's just a box I painted white, cut some holes in it, and glued some screening to it, and made myself a little wooden trellis kind of thing that I slide down in there so that they have lots of surface area to grab onto. Okay, when bee encounters go bad, as it says there, and I hate to read stuff to you, but not everybody can see it, so I'm going to. Some fool let his son help him work the bees. They were fully suited up, not the bees, the fool and his son. And the bees were not real happy that day. So we finished, did I just get that way? Yeah, we finished working the bees, and we left the bee hive and went back towards the house and stopped about halfway, which was a pretty good distance to take off the veils. Well, a bee had been following us all along, and as soon as my son lifted his veil, bam, right between the eyes. Now, fortunately, he still worked the bees with me, so it didn't scar him for life. But things can happen. So, again, my reason for giving this talk is I was asked, as that person who might sit at that point of interaction between urban beekeepers and their non-beekeeping neighbors, to kind of give some perspective on that. And, you know, my position, I am a beekeeper, I support urban beekeeping, but there are a lot of issues, and I did get a lot of calls. I'm no longer in that role, but I did get a lot of calls from people who had issues with their neighbors' bees, and some of them were fairly legitimate issues. A lot of times they want to know, well, what can I do about it? The city's got to have an ordinance. No, the city does not have an ordinance. Thank goodness the city doesn't have an ordinance. That would be a nightmare for them to try to enforce. It just would not be workable. But it can be an issue. Now this happened, I want to say now maybe 4 years ago. Came in Monday morning, there's a phone message on my message. And it was from this lady who had 2 dogs attacked by bees. They were her dogs in her backyard. They were attacked to the point where when she got home, they were lying comatose on the ground. One of them died several days later after very high veterinary bills. And she worked for the city. So she immediately went to the city structure and said, we got to do something about this mess. I went out there that Monday morning, and it was one of those Northeast Heights yards with tall cinder block walls. So I'm looking around her yard, and there's dead bees around because she did go after them with a can of Raid. But then I peeked over the wall and looked in the neighbor's backyard. And what did I see? Well, I saw an open Langstroth hive sitting there, open. Bees flying still in and out of it a little bit. No beekeeper anywhere around. Just an open hive. We got some of the dead bees. This was back when we could still send them out for testing. We did send them out for testing, and they were Africanized. So I put together, well, I'll get to what I put together in a minute. Because she was in the city system, she had enough pull to kind of get the city involved. And so we got a bunch of beekeepers together, and folks even from NMSU came up, and there was a big meeting, and We did get a hold of the hive owner and let him know that the bees were Africanized and they needed to be dealt with, and he did. But the neighbor was out the money and out the dog. It was not just a dog, it was her dear pet. So, a lot of things could have been done differently. First of all, she didn't know that her neighbor was keeping bees, so that was a surprise to her. I think what happened is that these Africanized bees, the beekeeper didn't know they were Africanized, so he got into the hive that day and they were really hot. He said, "The hell with this," and he ran inside and left it open. I'm guessing. But it was wide open. So, with the hive open, the bees came out, they went over the yard, they went over the fence in the neighbor's yard, and they went after the dogs. So, very bad situation all around. Do we need more laws to protect us from that? Well, the city doesn't want to do that. And I think I applaud them for that. I don't think that's the way to go. There was a lot of evidence that came out of this meeting that cities that have instituted ordinances and bans on beekeeping tend to have a worse problem with bee issues than cities where you have an active beekeeping community feeling the pulse of the local bees. But they do have rights, and they do have a reasonable expectation that your bees aren't going to cause them a nightmare. So that's where you come in as the beekeeper, making sure that your bees aren't the menace. So there's a few simple steps to really minimize the strong danger. They're bees, they can sting, there's always going to be some potential issue. But there's also some steps that you can take to educate your neighbors. And part of that is simply, again, knowing the limitations of your site. I just moved from the valley up into town. I had 3 hives, only one of them survived the winter, and it turns out to me that that's probably a good thing, because as I kind of tried to fit myself into that yard along with 3 beehives, I thought, that's too many. So the limitations of my site dictate that maybe I don't keep 3 beehives. If you really want to have a lot of bees, don't be in the city doing it. Go out in the country where you can have a lot of hives. Now, just imagine if we had rain on a regular basis. Wouldn't life be different? This picture from London, rooftop urban beekeeping, and there's all kinds of forage right there and all around, and that's just a beautiful sight. So it obviously can be done. It is done all over the place. So, talking about some of those simple steps. To me, one of the really big ones is water. Making sure that your bees have ready access to reliably available water close to the hive, so that they don't have to go to the neighbor's pool, the neighbor's fountain, the neighbor's dripping hose, whatever it is. Think about where they're going to be foraging too. And right now is kind of a nice time, because I'm driving around my neighborhood and I'm seeing, here's where all the purpley plum trees are, and here's where the peach trees are, because you can see things starting to bloom, and I know, okay, that's kind of out where they're foraging. The hive location, is it out in the middle of traffic? I did get a call from a fellow living not too far from where I live now, who said, well, I was walking down the sidewalk, and my neighbor, who lives on the corner lot, has 3 hives out in the middle of his front yard. Actually, not in the middle of his front yard, kind of close to the sidewalk in his front yard. And this is an area where you've got a lot of kids walking through. You've got people walking dogs, and it's just, again, it's kind of like, did you mean to piss everybody off? A little bit of thinking that through. Inspect your hive regularly. Know what's going on in there. Be aware if they're getting ready to swarm, because that's going to be a potential issue. And then things you can do for the neighbors. Let them know what you're doing. Educate them a little bit about bees, and how you intend to be involved with your beehives to make sure that there aren't issues coming up. And it's that, sweeten the deal, give them a little bit of your honey, and say, hey, this is what my bees are doing with your flowers. Isn't that great? And then understand that they may still not fully appreciate it, or maybe they do, but maybe they're allergic, or maybe they've got young kids, or they may have some very legitimate concerns and complaints. And really, in terms of, again, trying to be a good neighbor, one of the things is to not, on your part, take a really staunch position. Well, the city says I can have them, so the hell with you. You know, that's just not going to make a good working relationship. Try to see it from their side. Water. I'm a really big fan of poultry waters. That's what I use. 5-gallon poultry water. This is an older one I'm not using right now. I'm using a plastic one, and I fill that trough with rocks big enough that they poke out of the water and the bees can stand on the rocks and get the water. And that water sits right on top of the hive. They can get to it all the time. So that's just one option. There's many other ways to do it, obviously. Thinking about it again from the bee's perspective. There's a lot of gardening that happens in cities. Lots of people like pretty flowers. Turns out a lot of those flowers, if they are hybrid varieties that have been bred for showy flowers, may actually not have a whole lot of pollen to offer, may not actually have a whole lot of nectar to offer. So one of the things is in your own garden and in any promotion of gardening that you do, kind of think back a little bit. Think back to wild species, native species, not hybridized things, things that might actually provide some forage for the bees. And the public spaces can be some pretty good places for forage. Some of our parks, there's often lots of good pollen or nectar producing trees and all of that in there. I read this article that had come out. It was written by somebody in England, and I don't remember who, but the article was raising a very good question, which was if all of us who like bees go out and get new hives and add to the bee population, are we going to overtax the resource base that exists in that locality? So, you know, again, think in terms of what can you do to augment the forage in your own landscaping, in your own planting, and talking to your neighbors. And, you know, maybe you don't like London rocket, that little yellow mustard weed that's out blooming right now, but maybe you let it go a little while because the bees like it, and then you take it out. Think about the native pollinators too. There are 500 species of native bees in the state of New Mexico. That does not include the honeybee. All of them are pollinators. All of them want nectar and pollen. And if we overload the system with honeybees, we're going to be taking some of that native pollinator forage away from the native pollinators. Okay, thinking about hive location. I know TJ likes his rooftop location. I don't know if anybody else in town who has a rooftop location. It's a very elegant idea if you have a good way to move them up and down when you need to. Gets them out of foot traffic, gets them up above the action, and that's a good idea. I think out here our sunlight is so intense I'd like afternoon shade on them if I had them up on the roof. Backyards, a lot better than front yards. Front yards are fairly public. And that's where people are walking through and the mailman's coming up and, you know, can you put them in the backyard? And then think about the bees. They don't stop at the wall. They hit the wall, they fly over and go on. Well, what are they going on to? What do your neighbors have going on? And kind of imagine how those bees are going to be interacting with that space. Okay, hive management. I like to think that they don't really need it. I mean, they've been around for millions and millions of years without us interfering with them, and they've done just fine. They don't need it, but in order for us to work with them and have them be our partners, we need to do that to kind of keep an eye on them. So having an idea of the state of vigor and health of your hive, being able to check for diseases and parasites, things like that, knowing when the nectar flow's coming, seeing what's going on with the cells being built. Are you building an abundance of queen cells? Are they getting ready to swarm? And then if you're working them regularly, you're going to know as well kind of what their state of gentleness is. the swarms that the hives that I have, I've built up from collected swarms, and it's something in the water in Albuquerque makes bees gentle. They're very gentle bees. But maybe I've just been lucky. You know, there are certainly a lot of bees that under the same management are going to be a lot more aggressive. Okay, speaking of swarms, I really like the idea of trying to catch and hide as much of that swarming activity as we can. One, it's free bees, and I'm all about free. Free is my price. But it also provides kind of a way for the bees to have their own population and to be interbreeding and going through local adaptation to local conditions. So ideally, we end up with bees that are fairly attuned to our environment here. Also, this idea that, you know, there's X amount of forage out there, depending on the rainfall, it's X minus something. Or I should say the lack of rainfall. And I'm not trying to knock Craig's business of bringing in bees, but if we bring in too many bees to an area that already has a fairly substantial population, are we going to be, again, increasing the pressure on the available forage? So by working with the swarms that we do have coming out, it's kind of using what's already there. Okay. For the neighbors, communication. You know, the best behaved bees still have their own agenda. And they'll put up with you as long as your agenda doesn't differ from theirs too much. But they're feral creatures, more or less. They have their own ideas of what they need to do, and what we're trying to do is make sure that our agenda fairly matches theirs. Well, the neighbors have an agenda as well. My neighbors, two of my neighbors, have pools. They're going to want to sit out in the summer by their pools. If I don't keep my bees well watered, my bees are going to be trying to get in their pools, and I'm going to have very unhappy neighbors. And it's their right to sit out in front of their pool and enjoy it. So I need to be respectful of it. Let your immediate neighbors know what you're doing. You know, and tact. I can't speak enough for trying to be tactful. If you go into your neighbors again and you say, well, I'm keeping bees, damn it, and that's just the way it is, you're going to have a fight. Just because. They may like bees, but they're not going to like you. So, be tactful. Address their concerns. And sometimes it may be that you say, you know, as much as I love beekeeping and as much as I think it's not a problem, 2 out of 3 immediate neighbors do think it's a problem, and I got to rethink my position. Maybe you find a friend and keep your bees at their house where conditions are better. I don't know. You do something. Okay. This is another real life example. A lady who called me, her neighbor had bees, and he had started out with 3 hives, and he had told her about it, and she was fine with bees. She was fine with 3 hives of bees. But now he had like 8 hives. And there were just so many bees that it really was interfering with her ability to enjoy her own space. And it's funny, you know, as an extension agent, I get a call from somebody, and I say, well, do you have a good relationship with your neighbor? Yeah. Well, have you talked to him about it? No. Okay, start there. Don't call me, go talk to your neighbor. But in any case, what happened here is that beekeeper realized, oh yeah, this is a problem for my neighbor. I'm going to move most of my hives somewhere else. Problem solved. So, there's a question. How many hives are you allowed to have? City ordinance. There isn't one. I don't know that there's anywhere written and enforceable a number of hives you are allowed to have. But how many should you have? That's a whole different thing, and it's a very site-specific question. Or site-specific answer. Okay. Most of the times that I've had interaction with a beekeeper versus neighbor issue, it's been because the beekeeper was being a little unreasonable. I don't get calls when there isn't a problem. So there's a whole bunch of relationships out there that are going just fine, but it's when somebody is being problematic, and sometimes it's the neighbor, sometimes they just hate anything that flies or walks or crawls and kill it all. But a lot of times, it's the beekeeper. All right, so I pulled a bunch of stuff off, some stuff that Kim Flotem had put together about urban beekeeping in terms of where you put your hives. Well, away from property lines is best, or if they have to be close to property line, the backyard property line is probably a better point than the side yard or the front yard. Screening might be very helpful, kind of keeps the bees, as they come out, they fly up, and maybe if the screening's high enough, they kind of get out of the range of where people are walking, and it kind of just keeps them out of sight so people aren't constantly freaking out when they go out the backyard and see hives on the other side of the fence. If they don't see it, maybe they don't notice that there are bees. Maybe if they see the hives, then they notice the bees. So, tall enough screening. Hopefully, you can keep them away from occupied buildings, but again, what's away mean? Is that 5 feet, 10 feet, 50 feet? I don't know, it's very site specific. But at least kind of away from the entrances and walkways where there's going to be a lot of human activity. Neutral colors for your bees. That's a picture Chantal took in Europe when she was visiting. I pulled it off her website. You know, I painted mine white just because I think out here, especially in our really hot sunlight, etc., white tends to keep a cooler interior. But other people don't paint them at all, and they're just natural wood, and that seems fine. And I don't know if people have experimented much with different colors. I don't know that the bees really care, as long as it's not too hot for them. Make sure that they're well supported. And make sure that you can work around them. From all sides, you can get to them as you need to do the things you need to do to maintain and interact with your bees. Avoid having droppings fall on neighbors. Face natural flight paths away from neighbors, ideally. Now, of course, this is really good advice. I have yet to discern exactly in my new setting with my one active hive where the flight path is, because they're coming and going in all kinds of directions. So some of this may not always be practical. Water. Now, this is a great idea. One thing to do with all those old wine corks that might be accumulating. Great surface for the bees to walk on. Place colonies near natural water source. Sorry, this was not written for New Mexico. This is Kim Flotten or somewhere else. We ain't got no natural water sources. So if that's not available, make sure that you have something available for them. And don't let it run dry. Because they'll get used to going there, and then if it's dry for a few days, they're often looking for something else. And that's when they become maybe an issue for your neighbor. What? I'm sorry. And please, if there's any comments or questions or digressions or tomatoes, go ahead and throw them. On numbers, okay. Reasonable numbers. 1 or 2. Probably not more than 5 in most cases. Now, if that is your neighbor's backyard, even a beekeeper might say, that's too many bees. If they're on the rooftops, you can increase the number because you're getting them up out of traffic, etc. And it depends on the size. You know, if you live on 2 acres in the North Valley and you're surrounded by your own vegetation, heck, have 8 hives. But if you're in a little duplex in the student ghetto and you've got room for half a hive, have a small hive. Just be logical about it. Other stuff. Some places you have to register your colonies. In New Mexico with hobby beekeepers, no, we don't have to. And again, the city does not want to get into that of trying to monitor beekeeping within the city. I think they realize that it would not work well if they did try to do it, and they'd have to fund it, and there's other uses for all that money. Okay, inspection may be an issue. Don't work colonies when neighbors are outside. Probably generally a good idea. It may also depend on how secluded your hive location is, even in a small yard. If it's fairly secluded, maybe it's reasonable if they're just coming and going outside. Make sure it's good weather. Work them. Don't work them at night. Don't leave hive debris and unused equipment out where bees can find it, because they'll be going after scraps of honey and stuff like that. Working during the best part of the day, mid-morning to mid-afternoon. Now, at a recent planning meeting for this beekeeping, certified beekeepers class, TJ made the comment that he likes to work them, kind of mid-morning because the temperatures are best. And then I believe it was Randy said, well, he works when he gets home from work, and that's when he can. And so there's what's ideal, and then there's what you can do, and those aren't always the same. So, as long as you are doing the best you can with your circumstance, then that's good. If you've got a really aggressive colony, requeen them. Kim suggests all queens should be marked. I personally don't, but I'm a pretty hands-off kind of beekeeper in that way. If colonies are kept on land not owned by the beekeeper, but with permission of the owner, then maybe you should put a sign up that has your contact information, so if somebody does have an issue, they know who to call and contact about it. Avoid robbing situations, and if it starts, stop it. Do whatever you need to do to not let that robbing activity go on.
How would you know if somebody,
How would you know if there was robbing going on? I'm going to pump that question to somebody more.
I've had it happen, and what I found was there was probably 10,000 bees outside, very aggressive. You will find fighting going on in the front on the landing, wherever your bees are. And it's your house bees trying to fight off somebody else's bee. And they could be your neighbor, they could be one that's in a wall someplace. But what you'll find is your hive is having a hard time protecting itself. First thing you want to do, cut down the entrance or block it entirely. Yes, you're going to have some of your bees on the outside, can't get back in. Comes under the heading of too bad. The ones you got to save are the ones inside and the queen. Because the guys that are coming in are going to try to take, they're going to take the drug. They're going to rob all the honey. They're going to kill the queen because she's going to, her scent is what's telling the rest of the bees to protect that hive. So they're going to try to find her and kill her. And once they get inside, the bees have a harder time trying to separate their scent from your bees' scent.
so you just block off the entrance?
What I ended up doing when they hit mine, I came out, they had killed off one hive by the time I got home one day. I had 2 hives at the time. One hive, after I got into it and opened it up, there were dead bees 2 inches thick in the bottom of the hive. Nothing left inside. The other hive was being attacked at that point because all the bees in the neighborhood were attuned to what was going on, and everybody was there. I put some screen and covered up the hive entrance. And then I got out there in my bee suit and fly swatter, and I killed everything that was flying. The only way you can stop it is to stop it. And if you aren't going to use insecticides or anything else, I just stood out there and swatted back and forth, and I'm just swatting myself as much as anything.
And how long do you keep the screen on until?
I left it there until that night. If bees will remember, they will come back. A bear will remember for 3 years. If you stole honey, I'm having problems on that now. But the bees will remember, and there will be some that come back. So you're going to want to cut down the entrance of that hive to maybe an inch at most, where they can defend it. If you have a high opening, plug it up. And give them one place they can go in and out. Your bees will figure it out. They'll be able to handle it. And they will be able to have some guards sitting outside. And they'll be able to fend off the bad guys. It's when they get overwhelmed. This is 10,000 bees attacking the 100 that might be defending the United States.
So this is a pretty obvious thing. You walk out there and and
You
all of
will
a
be
sudden you
among
have like
10,000 bees
swarm,
and-
you're like, whoa.
Yeah, exactly.
You'll see bees killing the bees.
Yeah, you'll see them fighting on the land today.
And it's my impression that robbing situations really developing, your hive is very
I will
weak,
be weak.
and so they're vulnerable, the bees are vulnerable.
Yeah, mine, it was a springtime, about 3 years ago, and it was, almost no rain for the whole spring. So there wasn't a lot of stuff coming over the landing pad. Everybody was hungry when they found my hive. And I had that feeding.
Joran,
Yes.
a lot of times people will confuse orientation flights with robbing because every once in a while, all the young bees that are ready to go out into the world, they go out and do orientation flights. And there's a whole bunch of bees flying around. And you don't want to confuse that with robbing.
So the difference would be then the fighting on the landing platform behavior, things like that?
Yeah, in my experience, I've seen bees that are robbing, they kind of hover around and zigzag back and forth, and then they just go in real quick. They don't land and let the bees smell them, and they just kind of dive in and get past the guards and get in there. And then, you know, yeah, there's always fighting, but keeping your hive entrance reduced helps a lot.
Okay. And the bees will reduce the entrance on their own too with propolis. They'll wall it off and narrow it down if they can. Okay, so prevent swarming to the degree that you can stay on top of that as well, maybe doing splits, things like that. Insurance coverage might be something to look into. Keep records of your activities. This is one of those do as I say, not as I do things. In life, it's always keep good records. I agree, one should. For some reason, I just don't do it very well. Beekeepers should belong to a local beekeeping organization, if there is one, and that's the beauty of this group right here, is it's an informal organization, it's a community of practice, but there is a really strong community, and there are all kinds of people with a lot of knowledge, and I have yet to meet anybody in this group who wasn't willing to be helpful. So there's a great community to reach out to. The beekeeper should have taken a beekeeping class and be able to offer proof. Probably a lot of us, myself included, did not start that. I started by having a conversation with somebody saying, gee, I was thinking about getting into beekeeping. 2 days later he calls me, caught you a swarm. Okay, guess I'm a beekeeper now. Even coming to meetings like this, though, is some of that education that you might get in a more formal setting. But, you know, if you are, especially if you're new to beekeeping, consider there's a number of people who do classes of different levels, different kinds, different durations. Start taking some classes and read books. Extracting facilities should be tight. That's a good idea. So keep them from trying to get that honey back from you as you're trying to extract it. Extracted honey super should not be left outside on vehicles or in piles inviting bee visitation. Okay, so that's all I had to say. Thanks and be a good neighbor. Just real quickly, just for show and tell, I brought my swarm capture box, and then I brought a little homemade bee vacuum that I made last year. I had a call from somebody who wanted a small colony pulled out of the water main in their front yard. And I thought, well, that sounds like fun, I guess I'll do that. And so I went online and looked at bee vacuum designs, and some of them were pretty complicated, but this one It has some downfalls, but it's made out of just plastic containers with lids, and it actually worked reasonably well. I hooked it up to a small wet shop vac, wet dry shop vac, and it worked pretty well. So I'm going to leave that here for show and tell. Okay, thanks. Question?
I've heard about leaving your comb out after you extract the honey from it for the bees to clean up. Are you not recommending that, or?
I have heard of that too, and I'm going to put that out to the general body of much more knowledgeable folks than I, because the question has to do with, well, after you've extracted the honey, why not put the comb right back out there near the hive where they go ahead and finish cleaning it off and get their honey back? So, Randy.
As TJ would say, don't ask me how I know this, but putting it right by your hive will cause robbing.
Yes, in the hive.
So maybe in the hive, or maybe well away from the hive and let whoever cleans it
Well
up?
away from the hive in a place where it's not going to disturb your neighbors. Too.
Right.
It attracts a lot of bees.
Okay. So, considerations there. Yeah, if you could open up the hive and put it back in, then only your bees are going to get to it. Other thoughts on that topic?
It's important if you're going to put wet comb back into a hive, and you have 3 or 4 hives, to make sure everybody has wet comb. Otherwise, you have the same thing. You got to remember what's happened here is it's a dearth, and these bees have nothing to do. And they go over, oh, well, Joe's got some honey here, and then Joe's done, then it's Susie, you know what I'm saying? They just go right down the line because they're bees, and that's what they do. So you got to really be
If
careful.
you're going to feed one, feed them all.
That's what I would say. Yeah.
That makes sense to me.
Yeah. I've seen this many times, and the thing is that it's scary. Looking, the bees are not particularly aggressive, they're working. But if you, especially a new beekeeper, when you put out wet comb, they clean it up, one day later it's gonna be dry. It's amazing. But on that first day, there's gonna be a lot of bees. And you can see where people who saw that, and where beekeepers get freaked out. So I have the luxury of kind of I put it in the backyard, usually out the front yard, I'm in the mountains, this little front back thing. So, not like you but it's a long way away, no problem. Boy, is it impressive.
All right. Well, again, thank you, and I am now going to try to ask.